The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins, dramatised for radio in 6 parts by Brian Gear, with music composed by Sidney Sager. The Moonstone, Part 2.
Gabriel Betteridge is my name, and I am my Lady Verinder's steward at the family seat in Yorkshire. Perhaps you will remember that Mr. Franklin Blake wanted me to begin the story of the Moonstone, telling you just as much as I knew at the time, and no more. Let me go back a bit. The Moonstone was a large diamond left by Colonel Herncastle to his niece, Miss Rachel Verinder, on her 18th birthday. But the Colonel was a secretive man, and some trouble seems to accompany the Moonstone wherever it goes. When Miss Rachel's cousin, Mr. Franklin, brought it to her in Yorkshire, he was followed by 3 Indians. According to Mr. Murthwaite, the explorer, who lives in our locality, they're Brahmin priests, dedicated to getting the diamond back by any means whatever. The morning after Miss Rachel's birthday, I was just opening the front door when my daughter, Penelope, called out that the Moonstone had vanished from Miss Rachel's sitting room where it was left overnight.
Now, Father, come and see for yourself. I saw Miss Rachel put the diamond into the Indian cabinet last night. When I came in with our cup of tea at 8 this morning, I found the drawer open and empty.
Is this true, Miss Rachel?
Yes, Betteridge, it's true. The diamond is gone. I'm going into my bedroom and I don't want to be disturbed.
Betteridge, what is the matter? What is all this noise?
The diamond, my lady. It's gone.
And where is Rachel?
In her room, my lady, and she has locked the door.
Rachel, it is I.
I do not wish to see anyone, Mamma.
Rachel, open this door instantly. Now, Rachel, what is all this about the diamond?
Poor Miss Rachel, I've never seen her so upset.
What's this, Betteridge? Miss Rachel's diamond gone?
Yes, sir. I'm afraid it's true.
Oh, how awful. How very shocking. Are you quite sure?
Quite, Mr. Godfrey.
Oh, dear me. How very unfortunate. Oh, Franklin, have you heard the news? Rachel's diamond is missing.
What's that you say, Godfrey?
The diamond, the Moonstone. It's vanished.
What?
The Moonstone has gone from where it was put in the Indian cabinet.
Gone? Gone, you say?
Are you quite well, Mr. Franklin?
You don't seem quite yourself, sir, if I may say so.
Well, the fact is, Betteridge, last night I had the best night's sleep I've had for ages. I haven't quite woken up. However, let's think what to do. Now, where was the diamond put?
In the Indian cabinet, Mr. Franklin. I saw Miss Rachel put it there.
Well, now, perhaps it's fallen down behind the drawer. Have you looked, Penelope?
Why, no, I haven't. I was so upset, and so was Miss Rachel.
Well,
But
then,
just-
look now, girl, look now.
Yes, Father.
I'll look on the floor in case it fell down and rolled away somewhere.
Would you like some black coffee, Mr. Franklin?
No, thank you, Betteridge. I'm beginning to wake up now.
The diamond is definitely not in the cabinet.
I can't see it on the floor.
Penelope, knock and see if Rachel can tell us anything.
Well, I'll try, sir, but really she seemed so upset.
Oh, good morning, Franklin. Godfrey.
Good morning, Aunt Julia.
Good morning, Aunt Julia.
Excuse me, my lady, but Mr. Franklin wishes to speak to Miss Rachel.
We thought Rachel might be able to tell us something.
Impossible. She seems quite overwhelmed.
But did she say anything to you which might throw any light on the matter?
Nothing, not a word. She seems positively to shrink from speaking of it, even to me. I suppose I have no alternative but to send for the police.
And the first thing for the police to do is lay hands on the Indians who were here last night.
The jugglers? Whatever for, Franklin?
Because they stole the Moonstone. Aunt Julia, we mustn't lose a moment. Give me a letter of introduction to a magistrate and I'll ride straight over to Frizinghall with it. And we may stop them before they've got away too far. Now then, Betteridge, while I'm away, make sure the servants leave the doors and windows exactly as they were last night.
Of course, Mr. Franklin. But I don't see how the Indians could have got into the house. I was awake till quite late and I heard nothing, no dogs barking.
One of them might have slipped into the hall while the dinner company were going away. He could have stayed hidden under a sofa until the house was quiet, and then the Moonstone would have been his for the taking.
But how would he have known where to look for it?
Eavesdropped at the drawing-room door. Rachel talked about where she might keep it last night. But I can't waste time in speculation, Betteridge. I must be off to Frizinghall. Yep.
It all seemed rather flat after Mr. Franklin had ridden off. My lady sent for me, and I had to tell her everything that I had kept from her so far about the Indians and Mr. Franklin's suspicions. She was a woman of high courage, and agreed we had been right to say nothing until now. Miss Rachel stayed locked in her room. The women servants took to whispering in corners, except Rosanna Spearman, who kept by herself. At 11 o'clock, Mr. Franklin came back from Frising Hall.
Well, Franklin, are the police coming?
Yes, Superintendent Seagrave and 2 men are following, but it's a mere matter of form. The case is hopeless.
Do you mean the Indians have escaped?
The poor Indians have been most unjustly put in prison.
But what about one of them being hidden in the house?
That has proved to be quite impossible.
Oh, would you explain yourself, Franklin, instead of adding to the mystery?
Perfectly simple, Aunt Julia. I took your letter to the magistrate, and the magistrate sent for the police. Well, so far, so good. But when the police made inquiries, they discovered that the Indians were still in the town. Hardly the act of guilty men. And more than that, they'd all been seen returning with their little boy between the hours of 10 and 11, which proves they'd walked straight back from here.
But might they not have returned later in the night?
No, the police had some reason to make inquiries at the lodging house where the Indians are staying, and they saw them all there at midnight.
And soon after midnight I went round and shut up the house.
So, that disposes of any idea of their returning and breaking in.
Then why are the Indians still in prison, Franklin?
Because the magistrate thought something might be turned up against them. So he committed them for a week as rogues and vagabonds to keep them at our disposal, as it were. But in truth, there isn't even a case of suspicion against them.
This gets worse. If the Indians did not take the diamond, then who did?
10 minutes later, Superintendent Seagrave arrived. He was the most comforting officer you could wish to see, tall and portly, and he ordered his 2 inferior officers about with great severity. He asked me to wait upon him in Miss Rachel's sitting room.
I've gone round the premises both outside and in, Mr. Betteridge, and the result of that investigation proving to me that no one has broken in, and I deduce that the robbery must therefore have been committed by someone in the house.
I sincerely hope you are wrong, Mr. Seagrave.
Oh, depend upon it, I'm right. So I posted one of my men on the staircase leading to the servants' bedrooms with the strict instructions to let nobody past him until further orders. Now then, I shall now examine this sitting room.
Here he is. Now, what's all this, Mr. Superintendent, about none of us been allowed to go to our room?
Who is this person, Mr. Betteridge?
Nancy Swales, our kitchen maid.
Well, then, Nancy Swales, it's true that until further inquiries have been completed, I have barred all the servants from going to their rooms.
Have you indeed? Then which of us do you think it was that did it? Can you tell me that?
That's right. You just
Now, silence. I will not have you women barging in here when I'm conducting an investigation. Now,
I don't know.
you. You.
Me, sir.
Who are you?
Rosanna Spearman, sir.
Well, Rosanna Spearman, you just look at the mischief someone's petticoats have done already.
What mischief, sir?
Well, that smear of paint on the door just under the lock.
tried to say that was one of
Clear out, all of you, will you now, please? Clear out. Now then, Mr. Betteridge, I should like to speak to Miss Rachel Verinder. Would you be so kind as to summon her for me?
She's in there, Mr. Seagrave, in her bedroom.
Oh, indeed. Well, then, pray ask her if she would kindly favour me with a word.
Miss Rachel?
What is it, Betteridge?
Superintendent Seagrave is here, Miss Rachel, and would like to speak with you.
I have nothing to tell him and I can't see anybody.
Very good, Miss Rachel. Did you hear that, Mr. Seagrave? Miss Rachel regrets that
I heard, thank you, Mr. Betteridge, and I must say I found the young lady's attitude, quite frankly, to be obstructive. Highly obstructive.
Miss Rachel is very upset by the loss of her jewel. I beg you to wait a little and see her later.
Very well, Mr. Betteridge. Well, as I cannot speak to the young lady, I should like to question her maid.
Yes, that is my daughter, Penelope. I'll send for her. Penelope told Mr. Seagrave all she could, which was little enough. Questioning Mr. Franklin, Mr. Godfrey and myself produced still less. Mr. Seagrave next tried to discover whether any of the furniture had been moved out of its usual place during the night. While we were poking about among the chairs and tables, Miss Rachel herself suddenly appeared out of her bedroom.
Penelope?
Yes, miss?
Mr. Franklin Blake sent you with a message to me this morning saying he wished to speak to me.
Yes, miss.
Where is he now?
He's on the terrace with Mr. Godfrey.
Then I shall go down and see him.
If you please, Miss Verinder, I would rather you favoured me with your conversation.
My business is with Mr. Blake, not with the Superintendent of Police.
dear.
It showed a want of due respect, but I couldn't help looking out of the window. Miss Rachel went up to Mr. Franklin without appearing to notice Mr. Godfrey, who drew back and left them alone. She spoke a few words to Mr. Franklin, who seemed to be utterly astonished by what she said. While they were still together, Lady Verinder came onto the terrace. Miss Rachel saw her, said a few more words to Mr. Franklin, and went back into the house. Then Mr. Franklin seemed to tell Mr. Godfrey and my lady what Miss Rachel had said to him, for they too stopped short in amazement. I had just seen as much as this when the door of the sitting-room opened violently, and Miss Rachel walked swiftly through to her bedroom.
Miss Verinder, I must insist, if I am to recover your jewel,
I
then...
have not sent for you. I don't want you. My diamond is lost, and neither you nor anybody else will ever find it.
Oh, dear. And precisely what am I supposed to make of that, Mr. Betteridge?
I can only assume, Mr. Seagrave, that Miss Rachel's temper is still upset by the loss of the diamond.
But I'm here to help find it.
That appears to be the very thing she objects to. I imagine that's what she was telling Mr. Franklin just now on the terrace. It was his idea to fetch you, and she was certainly saying something very serious to him.
And how, may I ask, does Miss Verinder know the diamond will never be found again? No, Mr. Betteridge, no. There's nothing else for it. I shall have to search the servants' quarters.
The result, of course, was that the Moonstone remained as lost as ever, and Mr. Seagrave was fast approaching his wits' end. At this point, Mr. Franklin sent for me in the library. To my astonishment, just as my hand was on the door, it was suddenly opened from the inside, and out walked Rosanna Spearman.
Oh, excuse me, Mr. Betteridge.
Rosanna, what are you doing in the library at this time of day?
Mr. Franklin dropped one of his rings upstairs, and I have just been to give it to him.
You should have handed it to me. Just because the police have turned the house upside down, there's no need for you to forget your manners, my girl. Now, don't let me have to speak to you again.
I'm sure Mr. Franklin was obliged to me.
Come in, Betteridge. I want a conveyance to the station.
Yes, Mr. Franklin, going to London?
No, I've convinced my aunt that we need a better man than Seagrave. Now, my father knows the Chief Commissioner of Police, and if anyone can lay his hands on the right man for this job, he can. So I'm going to telegraph him straight away.
Very good, Mr. Franklin. I'll have the pony chaise got ready.
Right. Oh, by the way, that girl who was in here just now, is she altogether right in the head, Betteridge? She behaved very oddly.
Oh? In what way, sir?
She came to give me a ring I'd dropped, and instead of going away again, she said, "They'll never find the diamond, will they? Nor the person who took it. I'll answer for that." And she heard your step outside, and she left.
I'm sorry that she's troubled you, Mr. Franklin, but I don't think there's any harm in the girl. I'll see that she doesn't bother you again.
Well, keep a careful eye on her, will you? This is a more important matter than you may think.
It's a matter of £20,000, sir.
It's a matter of quieting Rachel's mind. I'm very uneasy about her.
And so am I, Mr. Franklin. Oh, by the way, Mr. Seagrave says he wants to question the Indians at Frizinghall. He says he thinks someone in the house stole the diamond in collusion with them.
The man's a fool. Well, I suppose I'd better wait and see what the result is before I send my wire. But if you ask me, he's just trying to gain time.
Yes, sir. Perhaps you would be good enough to take him into Frizinghall with you. Oh, and Mr. Godfrey, he's interested in the interview with the Indians, too. On my way to the stables to order the chaise, I looked in at the servants' hall. They told me that Rosanna Spearman had been suddenly taken ill and was lying down in her room. Curious, I thought. She'd looked well enough just a few minutes before. She came downstairs again at tea time, had an hysterical attack, and was sent back to bed. I was forced to accept what Penelope had told me, that the girl was in love with Mr. Franklin. And so that miserable day came to an end, with Miss Rachel keeping to her room and refusing to come down to dinner. The next morning I met Mr. Franklin and Mr. Godfrey in the hall.
I knew it'd be a waste of time questioning the Indians again. Suspecting someone in the house, indeed.
I'm sure Superintendent Seagrave's experience in these matters is more to be relied on than ours, Franklin.
Mr. Franklin, sir. Mr. Franklin, a telegram for you. It arrived only a minute ago.
Good man. Let me see. Oh, excellent! Couldn't be better.
What is it, Franklin? Has the Commissioner found someone who can help?
I'll say he has. Sergeant Cuff, no less.
Sergeant Cuff? Where have I heard that name? The newspapers, perhaps?
There isn't his equal in England when it comes to unravelling a mystery. We're to expect him by this morning's train.
I shall be most interested to hear his opinion of the case. I'm afraid I must be in town on Friday. I have a ladies' committee on Saturday morning. But I'll gladly stay until the last train today.
I wonder what Seagrave will find to say for himself. He's coming back to us this morning.
I'm sure that Mr. Seagrave has done all that any competent officer can be expected to do. Now, if you'll excuse me, there are some notes I want to look over before Saturday.
Certainly.
By the way, Mr. Franklin, you remember Mr. Candy, with whom you had that discussion at Miss Rachel's birthday dinner?
Discussion? What discussion?
About your sleepless nights.
Oh, yes. And I was proved right. I had the best night's sleep for ages, and no medicine passed my lips. So much for Mr. Candy and his ideas.
Indeed, sir. But the postman tells me the poor man is in a fever. Quite delirious, he says.
Delirious? What's the matter with him?
Pneumonia, I shouldn't wonder. Don't you remember how it came on to rain very heavily and he only had his gig to drive home in?
Oh, yes. Well, there's rough justice for you. Is anybody looking after him?
He has an assistant, a Mr. Jennings. Strange man, but competent, I suppose. Sergeant Cuff drove up in a fly from the station. A lean, elderly man dressed in decent black, with a hatchet face. He asked to see Miss Rachel's sitting room, and I took him there with Mr. Franklin hovering in the background. Eventually he came face to face with the door covered with the decorative painting. Immediately he laid his finger on the little smear.
That's a pity. How did that happen, Mr. Superintendent?
Well, the women's petticoats did it. I was questioning the female servants in here yesterday morning, and, well, their petticoats did it, Sergeant. Mr. Betteridge was here, he'll tell you that.
Did you see which petticoat did it, Mr. Betteridge?
No, sir, I'm afraid I did not.
You noticed, of course, Mr. Superintendent.
Well, I can't charge my memory, Sergeant, on that point, but it's a mere trifle, after all.
I made a private inquiry last week, Mr. Superintendent. At one end of the inquiry was a murder, and at the other end was a spot of ink on a tablecloth that nobody could account for. In all my experience, I have never met with such a thing as a trifle, Mr. Superintendent. Before we go a step further, we must see the petticoat that made that smear, and we must know for certain when the paint was wet.
I can tell you that, Sergeant.
Pray do, Mr. Blake.
Miss Verinder and I painted the door. We used a vehicle that I myself devised. It dries in 12 hours.
And what time were the servants in this room yesterday morning?
Well, let me see. Oh, yes, the women were in here at 11 o'clock precisely.
Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. Now, Mr. Blake, do you remember when the smeared bit was done?
Perfectly. It was the last part of the door to be painted, and I finished it myself by 3 on Wednesday afternoon.
Ah. Today's Friday, Mr. Superintendent. Let us reckon back. At 3 on the Wednesday afternoon, that bit of the painting was completed. The vehicle dried in 12 hours. That is to say, it was dry by 3 o'clock on Thursday morning. At 11 on Thursday morning, you held your inquiry here. Take 3 from 11, and 8 remains. That paint had been 8 hours dry, Mr. Superintendent, when you supposed the servants' petticoats smeared it.
Well, yes, Sergeant, yes, indeed it had.
It is quite on the cards, Mr. Blake, that you have put the clue into our hands. Now then, it is clear from my examination of the smear that it was not done by a hard object, and no...
Miss Rachel. Sergeant Cuff, this is Miss Rachel.
Did you say that Mr. Franklin Blake had put the clue into your hands?
That gentleman, miss, has possibly put the clue into our hands. Now, may I ask you a question? Do you happen to know who smeared the paint on your door?
Are you another police officer?
I am Sergeant Cuff of the Detective Police.
Do your duty by yourself, Sergeant Cuff, and don't allow Mr. Franklin Blake to help you.
Thank you, miss. Now, do you happen to know anything about the smear of paint? Might you have done it by accident yourself?
I know nothing about it.
I told you, Betteridge, that I was uneasy about Rachel. Now you see why.
I've never known Miss Rachel to behave like this.
And now you see the difficulties I've been working under.
Miss Verinder appears to be a little out of temper. Natural enough. Now, I have looked at the smear closely. No skin mark like a human hand has printed off on it. Mr. Betteridge, could perhaps some large dog have got in here and done it with a whisk of his tail?
Quite impossible. No dogs ever come into this part of the house.
Then it must have been done by an article of clothing. The next thing to discover is when the door was last seen without that smear. Mr. Blake, did you notice your work here on the Wednesday afternoon after you had done it?
I can't say I did.
Who was the last person to be in here on Wednesday night?
Miss Rachel, I suppose. Oh, possibly my daughter. She's Miss Rachel's maid.
Would you be so good as to send for her, Miss Betteridge?
Penelope, come along now. I thought you might want a word with her, Sergeant, so I asked her to wait in the corridor in readiness.
Yes, Father.
This is Sergeant Cuff from London. He'd like to ask you about Wednesday night, Penelope.
Perhaps you'd be so good, Penelope, as to help me a little over that smear of paint on the door. Just under the lock.
Why, yes, sir.
And at what time on Wednesday did you last see the door?
Why, I should think after I wished Miss Rachel good night. About 12 o'clock.
And was it smeared then?
No, sir.
Could you have smeared it accidentally yourself as you went out?
Well, I suppose I could have, sir. But I knew the paint was still wet and took particular pains to hold in my skirts.
Do you happen to remember the dress you had on?
Why, it was this one. And there's no paint on it that I've noticed.
Indeed. You seem to be right, Penelope. Can either of you gentlemen see any paint on that dress, perhaps at the back?
No. None at all.
Oh, neither can I.
Thank you, Mr. Seagrave. Then I think we can safely say that someone must have been in this room and done the damage to the paint between midnight and 3 o'clock. This trifle of yours, Superintendent Seagrave, has grown a little in importance since you noticed it. We have now to look for an article of dress in this house with a smear of paint on it, and to ask the owner of that article how he or she can account for being in Miss Verinder's sitting room in the early hours of Thursday morning. If that person can't satisfy us, we haven't far to look for the hand that took the diamond. I'll not detain you any longer from your regular business in the town, Mr. Superintendent.
Well, I've only one opinion to offer on leaving this case in your hands, Sergeant Cuff. There is such a thing as making a mountain out of a molehill. Good morning.
Be so kind as to leave one of your men here in case I should want him, Mr. Seagrave.
Very good. Sergeant Cuff.
Mr. Betteridge, ask her ladyship if I may have 10 minutes' conversation with her, as soon as it may be convenient.
Is this absolutely necessary, Sergeant Cuff?
Absolutely. The other officer has done a world of harm by letting the servants see that he suspected them. But at the same time, their rooms must be searched again, because the first investigation only looked for the diamond, and now I must look for the article of clothing with the paint on it.
And if you find that, I presume it implies you have also found the thief.
At present, I don't say the diamond is stolen. I only say it's missing. And finding the dress with the paint on it may lead to its recovery.
My servants have been with me for years. I will not allow them to be insulted a second time by having their rooms searched as though they were common thieves.
But suppose, your ladyship, that this time everyone in the house consented to be searched. That would impress the servants as fair dealing between them and their betters. And instead of hindering the investigation, they will make it a point of honour to assist it.
Oh, what do you say, Betteridge?
I agree with the sergeant, my lady.
Then you shall speak to the servants with the keys of my wardrobe in your hand, Sergeant Cuff.
Thank you, my lady. But hadn't we better make sure that the other ladies and gentlemen will consent?
Come in.
Excuse me, Aunt Julia, but it's time for me to depart to catch my train, and I've come to take my leave. Franklin here is coming to the station with me.
Well, just before you go, Godfrey, Sergeant Cuff wishes to search the servants' rooms again, and he proposes we all consent to be searched. May I have your agreement?
Of course. Here's the key to my trunk, Sergeant Cuff. It can follow me to London when you have done with it.
Nothing I have is under lock and key. You may search my things with pleasure.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Perhaps you'd say my farewell to Rachel, Aunt Julia. When next I see her, I hope I may return to a certain subject which I mentioned to her on her birthday.
Come along, Godfrey. We've no time to lose.
Oh, yes. Thank you for reminding me, Franklin. Farewell, Aunt Julia.
Godfrey. Well, it now remains only to obtain Rachel's consent. I shall go and speak to her at once.
There is just one more thing, your ladyship. May I see the washing book, if you please?
Certainly, if it will bring this business to a speedier conclusion.
Your ladyship, I'll have Samuel send someone up with it immediately.
While you are waiting for the book, I will go and see my daughter. I hope not to keep you waiting for her answer.
Thank you, your ladyship. You're being most helpful.
You will have the book in a moment, Sergeant Cuff. I see you are admiring the view from her ladyship's windows.
I was looking at the rose garden, Mr. Betteridge. Gravel walks between the roses, dear, dear. Tell your gardener grass, not gravel, Mr. Betteridge.
You sent for the washing book, Mr. Betteridge.
Ah, yes, Rosanna. Thank you. Here you are, Sergeant Cuff.
Thank you, Mr. Betteridge.
You are looking pale, Rosanna.
I'm all right, Mr. Betteridge. Thank you very much.
I heard you were not well yesterday.
It was nothing, Mr. Betteridge. It's past now.
Thank you, Rosanna. Here you are. You may return the book.
That will be all, Rosanna.
Thank you, Mr. Betteridge.
Why did you want the washing book, Sergeant Cuff?
Because when Superintendent Seagrave drew the attention of the women servants to the smear of paint, he may have pointed out the necessity of getting rid of an article of clothing, presuming it belonged to one of the servants. If it were an article of linen, it might have been sent to the wash or been made away with by its owner. Now, tell me, has that young woman been here as long as the other servants?
Rosanna Spearman. Why do you ask?
Because the last time I saw her, she was in prison for theft.
Sergeant Cuff. Rosanna Spearman was once in prison. She was also in a reformatory in London, in which my lady takes a great interest. Rosanna was recommended by the matron as being a totally reformed character, and neither I nor her ladyship has had any serious cause for complaint since she has been in service here.
No serious cause, Mr. Betteridge?
No cause to doubt her honesty, Sergeant Cuff. It is true she is not like the other servant girls. She has fainting spells, is all that I meant.
And a deformed shoulder.
Sergeant Cuff, it pains me beyond expression to tell you this, but my daughter will not allow you to search her room. I gave her your reasons, but she was adamant. She will not consent.
In that case, your ladyship, the idea must be given up. Either all the rooms must be searched or none. Mr. Betteridge, send Mr. Godfrey Ablewhite's portmanteau to London by the next train.
Unless there is anything else you wish to ask me, I should like to retire.
There is nothing, your ladyship, and my thanks for your assistance.
Oh.
You don't seem to be much disappointed, Sergeant Cuff.
No, I am not. Let's go into the garden and look at the roses. It's a pity Miss Verinder won't help me. She makes this investigation more difficult than it might have been. I have decided to see the servants and search their thoughts and actions instead of their rooms. Now, did you notice anything strange in any of them after the diamond was found to be missing? Anyone unexpectedly out of temper or taken ill? Hello?
What's the matter?
Touch of rheumatics in my back, Mr. Betteridge. We shall have a change in the weather soon.
Yes, I've noticed it myself.
Let's make our way to the garden. I want to look at your moss roses. I should have known. Shrubberies are as bad as doors for gathering eavesdroppers. Tell me, Mr. Betteridge, does Rosanna Spearman have a sweetheart like the rest of them?
Really, Sergeant Cuff, with her appearance, poor thing?
I ask for her own sake. You see, I saw her hiding in the shrubbery as we went by.
Very well, Sergeant. Yes and no. She has been foolish enough to fall madly in love with Mr. Franklin Blake. The shrubbery is his favourite walk.
I see nothing foolish in a girl falling in love with Mr. Franklin.
He scarcely notices her.
He'd notice her soon enough if she were pretty. However, I'm glad it's cleared up. Did you notice anything you couldn't account for among the servants when the diamond was found to be missing?
Nothing, except that we all lost our heads, including myself.
Would you allow me the use of a room for seeing the servants in?
You'd better have my own.
Thank you. Send them in order of rank. Just the indoor servants, Mr. Betteridge.
And so they went in. Cook, Lady Julia's maid, my daughter Penelope, Miss Rachel's maid, then the first housemaid and the second housemaid, Rosanna Spearman, then Samuel the footman, and last Nancy the kitchen maid, all emerging flushed or pale, tight-lipped or garrulous according as they had been dealt with. and when it was over, I went in and found Sergeant Cuff standing by the window and whistling The Last Rose of Summer.
Any discoveries, Sergeant?
If Rosanna Spearman asks to go out, let her go. But let me know first.
I hope you don't think she has anything to do with the loss of the diamond.
I'd better not tell you what I think. You might lose your head for the second time.
Come in.
Oh, excuse me, Mr. Betteridge, but may I have leave to go out for a bit? My head's that bad again and I'd like some air.
Why, yes, Rosanna, of course.
Thank you, Mr. Betteridge.
Are you blessed with the gift of second sight, Mr. Cuff?
No, Mr. Betteridge, just uncommon powers of observation, and many years of dealing with the sad byways of this little world. Now, which is the servant's way out? I'd like to know where she's going.
Ask Samuel, the footman. It's easier to direct you from the ground floor.
Just lock the door of your room, would you? And if anybody asks for me, say I'm in here, composing my mind.
Now, it may have been foolish of me, but I wanted to know what Sergeant Cuff had found out from his questioning. So I dropped in at the servants' hall where the women were taking tea, and there I learnt a lot. Shortly afterwards I came upon Mr. Franklin taking his favourite walk in the shrubbery, having returned from driving Mr. Godfrey to the station.
I wish to God I'd thrown the Moonstone into the quicksand that day I brought it here. Well, and what has the great Sergeant Cuff been doing?
He's been questioning the servants. And I've been doing some detecting of my own. Now, you've noticed yourself that Rosanna Spearman's been behaving oddly. Well, yesterday afternoon she said she was ill, but it seems that Lady Julia's maid and Mary the first housemaid didn't believe her. They crept up to her room where she was supposed to be resting and found her door locked and the keyhole blocked up and not a sound from the inside.
Well, of course not, if she was supposed to be lying down.
Yes, but that's not all. It seems the baker's man thought he saw Rosanna yesterday afternoon walking over the moor to Frizinghall.
What?
And there's more. Rosanna appeared at tea time, had an attack of the hysterics, and was sent back to bed. The same two women kept up their watch. They said there was a light under her door at midnight, and they heard a fire crackling in her room at 4 in the morning, and that's what they told Sergeant Cuff.
Well, there's an end of the mystery. It's obvious. The paint-stained dress is Rosanna Spearman's, and the fire in her room was an attempt to destroy it. She has stolen the Moonstone. I'll go in directly and tell my aunt.
Not just yet, sir, if you please.
Cuff! And why not just yet?
Because if you tell her ladyship will tell Miss Verinder.
Am I to understand that you forbid me to tell my aunt what has happened?
You are to understand, sir, that if you tell anybody what has happened until I give you leave, then I throw up the case.
Oh, very well, if you insist. Good day.
Mr. Betteridge, perhaps you'll be so obliging as to do your detective business along with me in the future. Now, is there any path leading from the house to the beach?
Yes, Sergeant, there is. Through the plantation of firs.
Be so good as to show it to me. Mr. Betteridge, you refrain from giving me any information which you think may tell against Rosanna Spearman.
Sergeant
No,
Cuff,
don't deny it, Mr. Betteridge. Your humanity does you credit. But you see, it's all a waste of time. Because Rosanna won't get into trouble, not even if I implicate her on the strongest possible evidence.
Why not? Has my lady said she won't prosecute?
She can't prosecute. Rosanna Spearman is simply an instrument in the hands of someone else, and she will be held harmless for that person's sake.
What other person? Do you know who?
Don't you, Mr. Betteridge?
No, Sergeant Cuff, I don't.
Do you happen to know if Rosanna has had a new outfit of linen lately?
Why, yes. As it happens, my lady gave her a new outfit only a fortnight ago. A little reward for her good conduct.
And a pity. But for that, we should have found a new nightgown or petticoat among Rosanna's things, and nailed her that way.
How? What has a new nightgown got to do with it?
Listen. At 11 on Thursday morning, Superintendent Seagrave points out to all the women servants that smear of paint on the door.
Mm-hmm.
Rosanna, who has her reasons for suspecting her own things, takes the first opportunity of getting to her room, finds the paint on her nightgown or whatever, shams ill, and goes to the town to buy the stuff for making a new one.
Really, Sergeant?
Hear me out, Mr. Betteridge. She makes it in her room on Thursday night, lights a fire, not to destroy the old one, there'd be a smell of burning and lots of tinder to get rid of, but to dry and iron the new one.
Then what does she do with the one with the paint on it?
She simply wears it, Mr. Betteridge. Nightgown or petticoat, it's hidden under her other things. She's occupied in making away with it this very moment at some convenient spot on that lonely beach ahead of us.
Incredible.
Logical, Mr. Betteridge. It's what you'd do yourself, I venture to suggest, in similar circumstances. Now then, when she asked to go out after I'd questioned her, do you know where she went?
No, of course not.
I followed her to a cottage in the fishing village. She stopped inside for some time, and when she came out, she had something hidden under her cloak. Yes. I shall have to find out what it was.
Why didn't you arrest the poor girl on suspicion?
I didn't want to risk giving the alarm to another person, so I came back to the house to ask you to bring me to the beach by another way. Ah, now look. These footprints in the sand. A woman's foot. You see, Mr. Betteridge? Some pointing to the village, some from it. Purposely confused, I should say. Now, perhaps you would introduce me at the cottage, Mr. Betteridge. It would speed the flow of information.
Was it the one next to the church?
It was.
Yes. She's friendly with the daughter, a poor crippled thing they call Limping Lucy. They're a comfort to each other in their affliction, I suppose. The father's a fisherman. Yolland, his name is.
Then let us see what they have to tell us.
So she wrote a letter there to a friend, Mrs. Yolland says.
And from Yolland's beachcombing, she bought 2 dog chains and a small tin case.
Now, what on earth would she want with those?
Oh, I can tell you that easily enough. She's joined the 2 chains and tied them to the hasp on the case. She's sunk the case in the water and made the loose end of the chain fast to some place under the rocks. She'll leave it there until this business is over, and then she'll come back and haul it up again. The mystery is, what the devil has she hidden in that case?
The Moonstone.
No, not the Moonstone. The whole experience of my life is at fault if Rosanna Spearman has got the Moonstone.
Then the dress with the paint stains on it.
If anything is thrown into that quicksand, does it ever come up again?
Oh, never. You can depend on that.
Does Rosanna know that?
Everyone round here knows that.
Then if she wants to be rid of the dress, all she has to do is tie up a stone in it and throw it in. She hasn't got rid of it. She's hidden it. Now, why? It's no good. There's nothing else for it. Tomorrow I must go to Freising Hall and discover what she bought there. Mr. Betteridge, I'm degraded in my own estimation. I've let Rosanna Spearman puzzle me.
Mr. Betteridge, my lady would like to see you and the sergeant immediately.
Very good, Samuel.
Just one moment, Mr. Betteridge. Samuel, has Rosanna Spearman returned?
Yes, sir, nearly an hour since.
And where is she now?
Why, at supper, sir, with the rest.
Thank you, Samuel.
Thank you, sir.
Now, Mr. Betteridge, let us see what Lady Verinder wants of us.
Sergeant Cuff, is it important to your inquiries to know if anybody is planning to leave the house?
Most important, my lady.
Then I have to tell you that my daughter proposes going to stay with her aunt, Mrs. Ablewhite of Freising Hall. She has arranged to leave first thing tomorrow morning.
May I ask when Miss Verinder made this decision?
About an hour ago.
My lady, I would be grateful if you could put off Miss Rachel's departure until later in the day. I have to go to Freising Hall myself in the morning, and when I return, I would like to say 2 words to her, unexpectedly.
Betteridge.
My lady?
Tell the coachman not to send the carriage for Miss Rachel until 2 o'clock. Tell him those are my orders.
Very good.
Have you more to say, officer?
Only one thing, your ladyship. If Miss Verinder is surprised at the change, please not to mention me as the cause. That's a wonderful woman. But for her self-control, the mystery that puzzles you, Mr. Betteridge, would have been at an end tonight.
Damn you, Cuff. There's something wrong about Miss Rachel, and you've been hiding it from me all the while I've been leading you on to it.
I did say that if I told you what I thought, you might lose your head again.
I beg your pardon, Sergeant, but I have served this family for 50 years. Miss Rachel used to climb onto my knee and pull my whiskers.
Don't distress yourself, Mr. Betteridge. In my line of business, if we were quick at taking offence, we wouldn't be worth salt to our porridge.
Well, tell me the truth, Sergeant. What do you suspect? It's no kindness to keep on hiding it from me.
I don't suspect, I know.
Do you mean to tell me, in plain English,
that Miss Rachel has stolen her own diamond?
I do. Miss Verinder has been in possession of the Moonstone from first to last.
Oh.
And she has taken Rosanna Spearman into her confidence because she calculated I would suspect Rosanna of the theft. It's the whole case in a nutshell.
But why? What are your reasons?
Not so hasty, Mr. Betteridge. If Miss Verinder refuses to put off her visit to her aunt, which you will find she will, then I shall be obliged to lay the whole case before Lady Verinder. So let the matter rest there for tonight.
But Sergeant
No, not another word you get out of me tonight.
Come in.
Excuse me, Mr. Betteridge, but my lady sent this message for you.
Oh, yes, thank you, Simon. It's for you, Sergeant. My lady says she forgot to mention that the magistrate at Frizinghall reminds her that the Indians must be released early next week.
Ah, yes. Let me see. Superintendent Seagrave's report mentioned an Indian traveller who spoke their language.
Yes, Mr. Murthwaite.
Ah, yes, Murthwaite. Be so good as to write down his address for me, Mr. Betteridge. I'll look him up when I go to Frizinghall in the morning.
The sergeant went to talk roses with the gardener. I lit a pipe. But this was the first trouble for many a year that wasn't to be blown away by a whiff of tobacco. I felt wretchedly old and worn out. Yet with all this I held firm to my belief in Miss Rachel. I knew her, and Sergeant Cuff didn't. There was a change in the weather coming, and after a bit I stirred myself to go to the hall and look at the glass. As I came up to the swing door leading from the servants' quarters to the hall, it was violently opened from the other side, and Rosanna Spearman ran past me.
Rosanna, what's the matter? Are you ill?
Speak to me. For God's sake, don't speak to me.
Is anything the matter, Mr. Betteridge?
No, Sergeant, nothing. Nancy! Nancy!
Yeah, Mr. Betteridge?
Go and look after Rosanna Spearman and hurry up, girl. Go on, hurry.
Yeah, Mr. Betteridge.
You get on my nerves, Sergeant Cuff. You're everywhere.
I find it pays to be.
Betteridge!
Oh, Mr. Franklin.
Excuse me, Sergeant. Betteridge, have you seen anything of Rosanna Spearman?
Yes, she's just run into the servants' quarters looking very upset.
I'm afraid I'm the one who upset her.
You, sir?
I can't explain it, but I really do believe she was on the point of confessing something. Something about the Moonstone, not 2 minutes since. What's that?
Only the swing door, Mr. Franklin. There's a wind getting up. What did Rosanna say to you?
I was in the billiard room, just having a knockabout, trying to get this wretched business out of my mind. Then all of a sudden there's Rosanna Spearman at my side, looking like a ghost. Quite startled me. Do you want to speak to me? I said. Yes, she said. If I dare. Well, what an odd thing to say. I thought she must mean something about the diamond. I don't quite understand you, I said. Is there anything you want me to do? And I just took another shot with the cue, and she said, he plays billiards, anything rather than look at me. Well, I ask you, Betteridge. And then she dashed out. I didn't mean to upset her.
You mustn't worry about it, sir. Rosanna is a strange girl.
Well, to tell you the truth, Betteridge, I almost wish the loss of the Moonstone could be traced to her, if only to... Oh, damnation.
I was pretty sure Sergeant Cuff had been listening at the swing door. He knew he could expect no more help from me, so it was just like him to help himself. As I was going the rounds and locking up that night, to my astonishment I found him stretched out on some chairs across the passage leading to Miss Rachel's bedroom, with a red handkerchief tied round his head.
Good night, Mr. Betteridge.
What are you doing here?
I want to stop any possibility of communication between Miss Rachel and Rosanna Spearman.
Why should there be any?
Oh, because there was a coincidence between the time Rosanna came back from the Shivering Sand and the time Miss Verinder said she wanted to leave this house. It's quite clear to my mind. But whatever Rosanna was hiding, your young lady couldn't go away until she knew it was hidden. They've already communicated once this evening, in secret. I want to stop them communicating again.
But Sergeant Cuff's uncomfortable night was spent in vain. Rosanna didn't try to speak to Miss Rachel. The next morning, before breakfast, I was taking a turn in the grounds. Going towards the shrubbery walk, I found the sergeant talking to Mr. Franklin.
One of the female servants spoke to you last night.
Once more, Sergeant Cuff, I have nothing to say.
At this moment, Who should appear at the other end of the walk but Rosanna Spearman, followed by Penelope, who was trying to make her go back to the house.
Come back to the house with me.
Seeing that Mr. Franklin was not alone, Rosanna stopped dead. Mr. Franklin saw the girls as soon as I did. So did Sergeant Cuff, but he pretended he hadn't.
You needn't be afraid of harming the girl, Mr. Franklin. On the contrary, it would be in her interest if you told me what passed between you.
I take no interest whatever in Rosanna Spearman.
The moment she heard that, Rosanna suddenly turned round and let Penelope lead her back to the house. The bell rang for breakfast, and Sergeant Cuff went to Freising Hall. As well as we could, we tried to settle down. Mr. Franklin went for a long walk after breakfast, and I went through the household accounts with my lady. After that, Penelope wanted a word.
Mr. Franklin hurt Rosanna cruelly by what he said in the shrubbery this morning.
He said that to help her. He could see that Sergeant Cuff was trying to make one or other of them give themselves away.
But surely he doesn't think either of them could have anything to do with the diamond?
He suspects Rosanna of having something to do with it. Oh, not of taking it, of course, but of being some innocent party to it. And he knew that she'd spoken alone to Mr. Franklin last night. Now, you keep that to yourself. Nothing's proved yet. But what was Rosanna doing in the shrubbery walk this morning?
Oh, she was bent on speaking to Mr. Franklin. You know how she feels about him.
Didn't you try to stop her?
Of course I did, Father. You saw that. But when she heard him say he took no interest in her, it frightened me. She seemed turned to stone. Now she's going about her work like someone in a dream.
At 1:45 precisely, Sergeant Cuff returned from Freising Hall.
Mark my words, Mr. Betteridge. You haven't seen the last of those Indians. There isn't a shadow of a doubt in my mind or in Mr. Murthwaite's that they came here to steal the Moonstone. And if we don't find it, they will.
And have you found out what Rosanna was doing in the town?
Yes. She went to a linen draper's and bought a piece of long cloth, enough to make a nightgown.
Whose nightgown?
Her own, of course. Between 12 and 3 on the Thursday morning, she must have slipped down to Miss Verender's room to settle the hiding of the Moonstone. Then, as she left, her nightgown must have brushed against the paint, which was still wet at that time. Paint wouldn't wash out, and she couldn't destroy the nightgown until she'd made another one to replace it.
But how do you know it was Rosanna's nightgown?
By the material she bought. Plain long cloth means a plain servant's nightgown. If it had been Miss Verender's, for instance, she'd have had to buy lace and frilling, and she wouldn't have had time to make it in one night. But the question is, why did she hide the other one and not destroy it? I must search the hiding place at the Shivering Sand. That's where the answer is.
But how will you find it? She won't tell you.
I should have made some sort of note of how to find it again, and she'll have that note on her or in her room. And while I was in Freising Hall, I took the opportunity of getting a search warrant, should I need it. The close carriage to take Miss Verender to her aunt, I presume.
Yes.
May I have a word with your footman on the back?
Samuel, just come here a moment, please.
Sir?
Sergeant Cuff wants to speak to you.
Samuel, there's a friend of mine waiting among the trees this side of the lodge gate. As the carriage passes, he'll jump up alongside you. All you have to do is hold your tongue and shut your eyes. Do you understand?
Yes, sir.
Do you mean to say you're setting a watch on Miss Rachel?
No one regrets the necessity more than I do.
Goodbye, Mama.
There is Lady
Goodbye,
Verinder, come to watch her daughter's leaving.
Try to forgive me. Goodbye, Penelope.
Goodbye, Miss Rachel.
Miss Verinder,
Yes?
I can't presume to stop you visiting your aunt. But if you do, it makes it much harder for me to recover your diamond. Now, do you go or do you stay?
Thank you, Sergeant. Drive on, Stockdale.
Rachel! Rachel! At least say goodbye.
I said drive on.
Rachel!
Yes, Stockdale, do as Miss Verender says.
Betteridge, for God's sake, get me away to the train as soon as you can.
Of course, Mr. Franklin.
Thank you for all your kindness, Aunt Julia. Let me go now.
If that is what you wish, Franklin. But let me see you before you leave us.
Penelope, have you seen Rosanna lately?
Why, yes, Sergeant. About an hour ago, that is.
And where was she and what was she doing?
Why, she was...
Come on, speak out. This is a serious matter we're dealing with, you know.
She stopped the butcher's man and gave him a letter to post for her in Freising Hall.
I suppose you have no idea to whom the letter was addressed?
To Lucy Yolland at Cobb's Hole. because the man said it was a roundabout way of delivering a letter directed to Cobb's Hole, to post it in Frising Hall, and the only person she knows at Cobb's Hall is Lucy.
That's true, Sergeant. But what do you think is in the letter?
A note to guide her back to the hiding place when she needs to go there in the future. Penelope, have you seen Rosanna since she gave the note to the butcher's man?
Why, no, I can't say I have.
Then she's either gone to Frising Hall before I can get there, or she's gone back to the Shivering Sand.
Please, sir.
Oh, and who are you?
Name's Duffy, sir. I weed the garden, sir. Are you looking for Rosanna?
I am.
I saw her not half an hour since in Plantation. She was running towards sea.
Do you know the coast hereabout?
Born and bred on, sir.
Do you want to earn a shilling?
Oh, yes, sir.
Then take me there. Penelope, get one of Rosanna's boots and follow us.
One of her boots, sir?
Do as I say and don't waste time. There's a good girl.
Yes, sir. I'll be as quick as I can.
Betteridge?
I'm coming too.
Then be content to follow. I do believe I can cover the ground faster than you. But first get the pony chaise ready. I may need it when I get back. Now come along, Duffy.
Aye, sir, we'd best make haste. We shall get a soaking afore long.
Rain, you mean?
Aye, you mark my words.
Here are her footprints. The rain hasn't quite blotted them out. Her boot fits them to a hair.
Then where is she? There's not a soul to be seen. Well, except that fisherman over there by those boats.
That's Mr. Yolland.
Then run and fetch him, Duffy. Go on.
Mr. Yolland, have you seen Rosanna Spearman?
All her footprints point to the rocks and the sea, Mr. Betteridge. There are none returning. She's been back to that hiding place and some fatal accident has happened to her.
No, Sergeant. No. No accident.
We're looking for Rosanna. I've seen out of her today.
These are her footprints, Yolland, leading straight out to those rocks, and none coming back. Could a boat have taken her off?
Well, no boat that ever was built could have got to her through those breakers.
She wasn't meeting a boat, and she didn't have an accident. She came here weary of her life, and she came to end it.
Mr. Betteridge, are you saying she deliberately killed herself?
I know she did, and I know why.
Oh, Father, I'd completely forgotten. She left a note for you. Here.
Give it to me, girl, give it to me.
I found it in her room when I went to fetch her boot.
Well, what does it say?
You have often forgiven me in past times. When next you see the Shivering Sand, try and forgive me again.
Well, there you are. What's that if he's not proof she come here to destroy us, then, poor thing?
Mr. Yolland, is there any chance of recovering her body when the tide ebbs?
No, sir. What the sand takes, the sand keeps forever.
That was part 2 of The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins, dramatised for radio by Brian Gear. The cast: Sergeant Cuff, John Franklin Robbins, Gabriel Betteridge, John Sharp, Franklin Blake, John Telfer, Rachel Verinder, Sally Baxter, Godfrey Ablewhite, Geoffrey Beavers, Lady Verinder, Petra Davis, Rosanna Spearman, Tammy Ustinoff, Penelope Betteridge, Josie Kidd, Superintendent Seagrave, Rex Holdsworth, Samuel, Matthew Adams, Duffy, Debbie Cumming, Nancy, Joe Scott Matthews, and Yolland, Tom Eastwood. The music was composed and conducted by Sidney Sager, and the programme, which came from Bristol, was directed by Brian Miller.